TCU is making a risky hire at athletic director by hiring someone with no NIL experience.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Happy 2025, everybody. Thank you for making Locked On Horned Frogs your first listen of the day, hopefully your first listen of the year. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I've been covering TCU athletics in some form or fashion for the past 12 years. TCU has made a hire at athletic director. They have replaced Jeremiah Donati, reportedly with Mike Buddie. Pete Thamel had this first from ESPN, and then multiple local people, Stephen Johnson, Jeremy Clark, and others have confirmed it, that they are working out a deal with Mike Buddie, the Army athletic director, to bring him over from West Point and put him in Fort Worth in the same position. A brief bio about Mike. If you've never heard of him or don't know a whole lot about his background, he played baseball at Wake Forest, and then he ended up playing in the pros as well, was drafted by the New York Yankees. He had a professional career with the Yankees and the Milwaukee Brewers. I saw an interview with him where he said he had an injury, had to have Tommy John surgery, and shortly after that shut down his baseball career, went back to his alma mater and decided to get involved with college athletics, worked his way up through the ranks at Wake Forest, had the opportunity to go be the athletic director at Furman, did a nice job there. They won 26 conference titles while he was at Furman. From a fundraising perspective, they had 3 different endowments of $1 million for the football and volleyball programs. Parlayed that into a job at Army in 2019, became the athletic director there. He didn't hire the current football coach, Jeff Monken, but he did get a contract extension with him done. Army coming off of a historically good season. And again, really good job on the fundraising efforts. Mikey Stadium renovation project, he spearheaded that. They broke ground on that a few months ago, renovating and kind of modernizing the stadium. Stadium's been around for 100 years, has been a huge part of Army football for a long time, honoring that legacy while also ushering it into the new world of college sports. It was over a $100 million donor-funded project. So innovator, like he's shown some really good signs through his career as a fundraiser. The thing that gives me pause about this hire, Army does not traffic in NIL. They haven't done it to this point. There's a federal law that doesn't allow service academy student athletes to benefit off their name, image, and likeness. A story that Ross Dellinger from Yahoo Sports wrote earlier this year. In the era of NIL, Army and Navy are without it, but they're pulling off historic seasons. He was talking about how Army and Navy at that time were both undefeated, doing a really great job, despite the fact that they were not using NIL as a resource because they couldn't. In this story, Mike Buddie was quoted as saying, people assumed that with NIL, everybody with the most money would win. That's maybe a reason at the SEC and Big Ten level, but at the Group of 5 level, it's different. The money isn't as big, and the G5 conferences and the talent gaps are not as wide. Some people believe that the importance of team chemistry, cohesion, trust, and effort has never been more of a difference maker. And, I mean, that's an interesting point. He's coming from a place where Army didn't have the benefit of having NIL, but at the Group of 5 level, with the bag money, to, for lack of a better term, being less than what you see in the Big Ten and the SEC, that doesn't make as big a difference as it does in the Power 4 world. Well, now you're stepping into the Power 4 world, and things are going to change most likely in the fall of 2025. Jeremiah Donati announced this past offseason that TCU was ready to make a full commitment. He said they would fully participate at the maximum level allowed when revenue sharing with student athletes goes into effect, which will be no earlier than the fall of 2025. There's a lawsuit on the books right now that people are assuming will be resolved potentially sometime in the spring that would put us in the world of revenue sharing. So right now, NIL is done by collective. So the Flying Sea Club has done an outstanding job working with TCU student athletes, trying to be competitive in that marketplace. They're not technically affiliated with the university. It's its own entity. This will make things more streamlined, and in a perfect world, it would put more regulations on NIL and what it looks like moving forward. You could potentially have contracts involved. Maybe eventually get to a place where there's some collective bargaining going on and there's some more set parameters, a salary cap. So you could spin it by saying, look, this world is changing and it's always changing. So if you haven't, had this foundation of working with NIL over the past few seasons, it's not a huge deal because it's going to change anyway. Well, I would push back against that and say Army wasn't planning on participating in this revenue sharing model anyway. So while I'm sure Mike Buddie has talked to people around the country and has friends that are athletic directors and working athletics in different places, he comes from the ACC world. I'm sure he has great relationships there with the people at Wake Forest. So he knows in theory, like what is going to happen. And I would imagine he's thought about this. I'm not naive. Like, I know the search firm that TCU hired to make this happen, they questioned him about this. I'm sure that the power brokers at TCU were like, what is your plan for name, image, and likeness and what it looks like in this new world? And he must have given them a really good answer if they hired him. But I think having that plan and that theory in your mind is much different than executing it. And it's no fault of his own. I mean, he was at a place, at a university, at a service academy where this wasn't a factor. And we can give him and the coaching staff credit for making it work despite not having those advantages. But he wasn't working with NIL on a day-to-day basis. And that's such a huge part of talent acquisition and just making things happen at the Power 4 level. It gives me pause that he hasn't worked in that area before. Now, on the positive side, as I said earlier, known as a really good fundraiser. So get in there, shake hands, do your thing, get to know the people around TCU athletics that are going to move and shake and make things happen, and get them fired up about donating to NIL, get them fired up about donating to facilities and to the programs themselves. He seems to have a really good reputation in the college athletics world. He's been at two different places, at Furman and at Army, where he had limited resources, and he was able to make things happen. He got a Nike deal done while he was at Furman. At Army, he got them into the American Conference after years of being an independent, aside from a brief stint in Conference USA in the late 1990s and then early 2000s. They were always an independent football team. He gets them into the American Conference in football only, but he has some experience with conference realignment, with getting a university and a football program into a new space and getting them acclimated to that. And they won the American Conference this year. Now, unfortunately, they lost the game to Navy, which is the biggest game of the year for them. But they stepped in and immediately took control of that league. But I'm still concerned about the fact that he just hasn't worked with some of the more modern aspects of college sports. And I wonder how quickly he can get acclimated to, okay, what's happening in the NIL world? How can we get donors and everybody on the same page at the university level, at the donor level, on the fan level, so that there's just a clear goal at all levels to make TCU as successful as possible. I wonder if he can do that. There wasn't a lot of smoke about who else would be considered for this job. There was some talk about Jeremiah Dickey, who is at Boise State and looks like he'll continue to be there. And that would have been really intriguing to me because he's done a great job at Boise State. They fell to Penn State in the playoff game tonight, but, he's done a good job there. He spent some time at Baylor, so he's familiar with the Big 12. It seems like the strength that TCU is relying on here is Mike Buddie has a track record of building relationships, making things happen in the fundraising aspect of things. And from what we know, or from what I know, I guess I should say, there's still some donors that were very upset about the way that the Gary Patterson era ended. the fact that he got let go, the fact that he got let go mid-season, and that has kept them from opening up the checkbook and saying, hey, let's keep the momentum going here. So if he can come in and do that, then that's a huge plus. I don't know enough about what the job of an athletic director entails to say this is a bad hire. I would just say it's a risky one because of the lack of experience in some areas of the modern world of college football. And I've seen some fans being worried about the transfer portal too, because at the service academies, you can't just take transfers in, right? Because there's a whole process there of getting guys admitted to the service academy. But also, after your sophomore year, you can't transfer. So there's not a lot of movement there. I saw Mike Buddie said in an interview, he was asked about kind of where college football is and how it's very different in the context of Army. And he said, well, a lot of teams a lot of programs are buying teams. We're building a team. So, you could look at that as an advantage or a disadvantage. You're not acquiring talent each and every year, but you also have a lot of continuity. I'm not as worried about that because to me, that's a coaching job. Like the transfer portal, coaches have to be aware of that. They have to handle that aspect of it. That's not the AD's job to have their hands in the day-to-day of that process. But the NIL piece is the thing that's got me hung up here. And I just wonder, what is his plan? Can he get up to speed quickly? Is he going to surround himself with people that are more well-versed in that aspect of the job? And does he have a good understanding of how this is changing on the fly and what the challenges are going to look like moving forward? Mike Buddie, Army Athletic Director, coming over to TCU. Pete Thamel had it first, but multiple local reporters confirming as well that he will be the Frogs' next athletic director. When we come back, a young defensive lineman hits the transfer portal. What are the New Year's resolutions for TCU football? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. One of our great sponsors is Gametime. If you need tickets. And so maybe you're somebody who procrastinates. You don't always jump on things when it's time to, or early on in the process, I guess I should say. One great thing about the Gametime app, they have last-minute deals, flash sales. So even if you're not somebody who buys tickets 2 months in advance, have no fear. You can still get a good deal on the Gametime app. They're very upfront with you at Gametime, which I love that. They show you a picture of the view from your seat when you sit down. There's no hidden fees. There's fees, but they show you a detailed breakdown, what it's going to be, and you don't go to the checkout and suddenly you're like, okay, I'm going to pay $60 more than I anticipated. They tell you this is the all-in price. This is everything you're going to pay. They itemize it. You check out. They go straight to your phone, straight to the app, I should say. I make it very easy for you. Download the Gametime app today. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Gametime, best place to get tickets on the secondary market. So a player from the 2023 class is in the transfer portal for TCU, Kevian Huddleston, who was a 3-star prospect out of Chapel Hill High School in Tyler. Over his time at TCU, had 1 tackle in 2023. Didn't see the field a whole lot, obviously. The thing about Kevian when he came in, he was a talented player, really productive at Chapel Hill, but weighed in at 235, or at least that's what he was listed at in 247 Sports when he committed, which is pretty undersized for defensive end, defensive tackle. New coaching staff. I think this is a guy looking for a change of scenery. Best of luck to him. This is kind of the world now of college sports and where we are at the portal. If you can't find a role, in your first couple of years on campus, then whether it's the coaching staff saying, hey, maybe it's best if you move on, or it was just Kevian kind of looking at it and seeing the writing on the wall and saying, I think it's better if I get a chance somewhere else. But looking for playing time, looking for a place where he could fit in better, have more of a chance to compete. And TCU's been active in the JUCO ranks and in the transfer portal by getting Ansel Denbu. Also have some guys coming back from injury next year, some young players they're excited about. Travis Jackson, a freshman, got a ton of reps. Marcus Deal, sophomore this year, got a ton of reps. Hopefully Paul Lawale and Avion Carter are guys that are healthy and effective this upcoming season. But, Keevan Huddleston from Chapel Hill going to give a try elsewhere, hits the transfer portal today. And remember, players at TCU, they have 5 days after the bowl game to enter the paperwork to get in the portal. So I imagine we'll see a couple more in the coming days that will also announce their intention to move on and try to find a home elsewhere. As far as what are TCU's priorities in the portal, it's the first of the year, so I thought this would be a fun little segment. New Year's resolutions for TCU football this season, or this upcoming season as they go into the offseason. My first one, and I talked about it at length after the bowl game and on Monday as well, got to find a way to get this run game going. And you did a nice job with the Savion Williams package and bringing that in to the team, getting him involved. That's great. But TCU has to find a way to run the ball in traditional style with your running backs, with your O-line opening up run lanes. I feel like I'm going crazy here. I trust the staff a lot. But, man, if there's a time to open up the checkbook and make something happen, I just believe you have to change up this O-line. Like James Brockermeyer moving on elsewhere. Looks like he's going to end up at Miami. You slide Colton Deary over to center, and you got Cade Bennett coming back from injury. I like the potential of Cade. He did a really good job at San Diego State. On the other side, though, Carson Bruno, Remington Strickland, Samir Camacho, Cooper Powers, these are all unproven players. And going into the year, you kind of already expected, okay, we're going to be unproven at tackle, right? Yeah, Ryan Hughes, we got Ben Taylor Whitfield. That'll be the spot that is really where we need to focus in, make sure those guys, have the scheme down, have their understanding of the blocking assignments down, are gelling well with the other 4 linemen. But now you're going to have some musical chairs in the interior too. That just doesn't seem like a great recipe for success. I'm okay with Nate Palmer and Jeremy Payne being the guys that get the lion's share of the carries this year. You brought in Kavorian Barnes from UTSA, which is kind of a, hey, maybe this guy can figure it out. He's had some success before. But, man, I don't know. I'm concerned about this O-line. You got to run the ball. You have to find a way to do it consistently. This team's not going to compete for a Big 12 championship by throwing it 40 to 50 times a game. They're just not. It's not winning football. It's not complimentary football. You've got to have some balance on offense. So that's first. Secondly, building on the continuity on the defensive side of the ball. Avery Helm coming back from injury. Nnamdi Obaizor coming back. Caleb Larmzor getting some more playing time this upcoming year. Bud Clark potentially coming back. Those young defensive linemen I mentioned earlier in this segment being a factor. Devin Deal at the stud position, who was super productive for you. You also got a guy like Jonathan Bax behind him, who has a year under his belt now. Andy Avalos. That physicality, that pressure on the quarterback, the creating havoc, creating chaos, fooling QBs into bad decisions, that has to emerge this year. You saw flashes of it this past season where you're like, okay, I see the potential there, but you didn't see it in its full form. It has to make an appearance and be on a more consistent basis for this team to be successful. If you can run the ball and play good defense next season, this team has a chance to be great. And then that third resolution, rebuild the wide receiver room. And they're in the process of doing that. They go and get Jordan Dwyer from Idaho. They landed Joseph Manjack. They got some freshmen, Terry Shelton on the outside, Ed Small in the slot, who could make an immediate impact. From a passing game standpoint, Kamorian Pimpton, the LSU tight end. They're losing a lot of production. I didn't even mention Eric McAllister coming back. But there's a number of dudes here who can make plays and make things happen. The problem is you're coming off a year where your wide receivers were not just good, they were elite. And so can you replicate that? Can you find a way once again to have game changers at that spot and not just guys who can move the chains and are consistent and get the job done, but to have like real deal dudes who win 50-50 balls, who make big plays each and every week? That's what you had in Jack Besh. That's what you had in Savion Williams once you figured out how to use them. That's what you had in J.P. Richardson, who's you probably didn't get enough credit for just how each and every week he was out there doing his job, getting it done. You've got to get back to that, and you'll have a lot of new faces that are trying to get acclimated with Josh Hoover quickly. The good news is you got a returner at quarterback who I think understands the responsibility that's on his shoulders and knows, like, I got to get the guys together. I got to make sure we're on the same page and we're moving the same, we're pulling the rope the same way this upcoming season. TCU playing tonight, and also we'll get to some of your thoughts coming up next year on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. FanDuel. It's where the game starts. Each and every day, people are making money on FanDuel. NFL playoffs are coming up, but you can close regular season strong at FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app. You hit on one $5 bet, you win a $5 bet, you get up to $250 in bonus bets. That's right. You hit on one $5 bet, you get up to $250 in bonus bets. You can bet on games live, NFL games live. It's not just, the traditional like, oh, Vikings are getting 3 points against the Lions this week. There's also prop bets. It's all available to you. If you've ever wondered, man, I know a lot about sports. I'm always taking in information. Maybe I should give FanDuel a chance. Great time to do it at FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. Hit on one $5 bet, get up $250 in bonus bets. Close the NFL season strong with FanDuel. TCU and Hoops, they are back in action tonight. So they won their first conference game against UCF, then had a quick non-conference detour against Brown, won that handily. And they're at home tonight, 6:30 against Colorado. The Colorado women, they won their first conference game of the year as well, and they did it against West Virginia, who's ranked. So impressive victory there. Frogs are number 11 in the country. Haley Van Lith, Sonoma Prince, they've been a great duo all year long. Seems like Donovan Hunter is starting to come on as well. Just a great defender. Also run that offense from the point guard position. A lot to like about this team early on in the season. We'll see how they fare against the Colorado squad that's talented and that's coming off an upset victory, but a chance to get to 2-0 in conference play as they try to build something and be championship contenders in the Big 12. Mark Campbell doing a fantastic job. We'll have some coverage of that. The men are back in action this Saturday against Kansas State. They fell to Arizona on Monday night in their conference opener. I sort of went on a different path on Tuesday's show. I talked about BYU getting left out of the college football playoff and how nobody even really seemed to notice that was a problem or that they got snubbed. And that's bad news for TCU and the rest of the league. Jacob Langford says, I thought the same thing. They had good wins and less losses than Bama or Ole Miss. No mention. That's terrible. Yeah, I mean, it's not even so much that they didn't make it. It's just the fact that, like, people didn't even seem to think it was a problem. We've had, hand-wringing for weeks about Bama. We lost to Michigan, by the way, today. South Carolina, who lost to Illinois. We'll see what Ole Miss does in their bowl game. Bottom line is those teams lost 3 games, and everybody just gave them the benefit of the doubt and was like, oh, well, Indiana, they shouldn't have been in. SMU, they shouldn't have been in. BYU beat SMU, and nobody even seemed to care. It's just the Big 12 this year. Arizona State got there. I hope they put on a great performance against Texas tomorrow, but they're going to have to make some changes and make something happen. Now, I will say Tech losing to Arkansas and Baylor losing to LSU, that's not helpful, right? I wish those teams could have taken down some SEC teams that were kind of beaten up and, not on their last legs, but weren't at full strength going into that bowl game. The Big 12's got to do something to change this narrative. Frog fan says the Big 12 had like 11 tiebreakers for conference championships. How's Iowa State making it in over BYU? If BYU made it, they would have won and been in. Potentially, I think that would have been a better game between BYU and Arizona State for sure. And yeah, the tiebreakers were a mess, and that's been across the country. These mega conferences, I don't understand why people are so against divisions or pods. You need something to give some more clarity to this. Honestly, the Big 12 kind of lucked out that it wasn't crazier than it was, and that it shook out a little bit better. Vince Pryor says BYU will be in the top 25 next year, but I've been saying for this for a while, being better than average in the Big 12 means you're not relevant. It will always be an SEC invitational. Yeah, I mean, there's something to that. And the Big 12's got to find a way to change that. Brett Yormark has done a great job of stabilizing the league, keeping it together, surviving the Big 12, Pac-12 staring contest. But now the question is, how do they get more respect? Well, Arizona State could do or could take a big step in moving that forward if they could win against Texas tomorrow. We'll have some coverage of that and more TCU athletics talk on Thursday. It's Locked on Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast platform.